ever get the feeling that your vote doesn't quite have the impact it should?
I know what you mean.
Like a small group of states are making decisions for the whole country.
Right.
Yeah, that's the Electoral College for you.
Exactly.
And it's kind of wild to think that,
Yeah,
this wasn't how it was always supposed to work.
that's right. And in today's deep dive,
Okay.
we're going to be looking at the surprising
Oh, okay.
and sometimes, frankly, contradictory origins of the Electoral College.
Very cool.
We're using a really fascinating episode of NPR's Throughline podcast.
Oh, nice.
It's actually also called Electoral College.
Okay.
And we're going to uncover how compromises, how political maneuvering, and even how slavery shaped the system that we have.
Yeah.
And look at why it's still sparking debate even today.
So let's go back to the very beginning.
Okay.
I'm picturing the founding fathers,
Yeah.
all huddled in a room, sweating it out in their powdered wigs, trying to figure out how to choose a president.
Yeah.
Did they, just stumble upon the Electoral College, or was there,
It's interesting because they really didn't just land on it.
Okay.
They went through a lot of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Like, should Congress pick the president? Should it be the governors?
Right.
What if we let people just vote directly?
Huh. Direct popular vote.
Yeah.
It seems so straightforward.
Yeah.
Why didn't they just go for that?
Well, you have to remember that back in 1787,
Yeah.
things were really different.
Okay.
Travel and communication were so slow
Yeah.
that there was this real worry that voters wouldn't know enough
Right.
about candidates from other states
Yeah.
to actually make an informed choice.
Well, yeah, they were dealing with, horses and buggies.
Exactly.
Not instant news, right?
Right.
But wasn't there another,
Yes.
big issue, especially for the South?
Oh, absolutely.
All talking about slavery.
Huge elephant in the room.
Right.
A direct popular vote
Yeah.
was a big problem for the South because a big chunk of their population,
Right.
enslaved people,
Right.
couldn't vote.
Right.
And this would have given the northern states
Yeah.
with more eligible voters a real advantage.
Okay, so that's where that,
Yes.
the infamous
Right.
3/5 compromise comes in.
Exactly. Enslaved people would be counted as 3/5 of a person.
Right.
Not just for representation in Congress,
Yeah.
but also when it came to deciding a state's electors
Okay.
in the Electoral College.
So the Electoral College became a way to try and
Yeah.
balance the power between states.
Yes.
But it was also about making the South happy. Right?
Yeah.
Even if it meant we didn't have a truly democratic system.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of crazy how a system designed in the 1700s
Yeah.
still affects elections today,
It really is. And, it shows how deeply ingrained
Mm-hmm.
this system is in our politics, in our political fabric, really.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that this
Okay.
first version of the Electoral College,
Right.
what some people call Electoral College 1.0,
Yeah.
it had its problems, definitely.
Okay.
And it wasn't long before those problems became impossible to ignore.
Oh, are you talking about that presidential election tie?
I am.
In 1800
Yes,
with Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr?
exactly.
Man, that must have been intense.
It really exposed
Yeah.
a big flaw in that original system
Mhm.
because the election ended up being decided in House of Representatives,
Right.
which at that time
Yeah.
was controlled by the opposing party.
Wow, that doesn't sound like a smooth transition of power.
Right.
No wonder they had to make some changes.
Yeah, that's exactly what led to the 12th Amendment.
Okay.
It created separate votes
Okay.
for president and vice president
Right.
and basically created what we know as Electoral College 2.0.
So they kind of patched it up, right?
No, not so fast.
Uh.
There's a twist here.
Okay.
Jefferson's win, the one that caused this whole amendment thing,
Yeah.
was heavily influenced by those extra electoral votes
Right.
that southern states got because of, well, you guessed it.
Because of slavery.
Exactly, the 3/5 compromise.
Wow. So not only did slavery shape the creation of the Electoral College,
Uh-huh.
it also played a huge role in one of its first,
Right.
big defining moments.
Yeah. And its influence didn't stop there,
Oh.
even after the Civil War.
Okay.
And after slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment,
Right.
the South still found ways to benefit.
Wait, how is that even possible if
Well,
slavery was abolished?
they started using strategies to stop black citizens from voting. But here's the thing.
Okay.
Those citizens still counted towards a state's population,
Okay.
which meant more electoral power for the South.
So even when the rules changed,
Yeah.
they found a way to, game the system
Exactly.
to their advantage.
Yep.
It's kind of disheartening, you know.
It is.
This issue of, discrimination in voting,
Yes.
it kept affecting the Electoral College even as we moved into the 20th century.
It did.
This is getting really interesting.
Yeah.
But can we maybe go back and talk a bit more about the 3/5 compromise?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's important for people to really understand
Right.
how it impacted the Electoral College.
It's essential to understand
Yeah.
that the 3/5 compromise
That's right.
wasn't just about representation in Congress. It was about power.
Right.
By counting enslaved people as 3/5 of a person,
Yeah.
Southern states could inflate their population count, which directly meant more electoral votes for them.
Right, right.
So they had a big advantage in presidential elections,
Right, okay.
even though a huge part of their population couldn't even vote.
So, from the get-go, the Electoral College was tied up
Yes.
with this really problematic part of our history.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes you think how different things could have been,
It does.
if the system had been built on a truly equal
Yeah.
and representative foundation.
It's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to another key moment
Okay.
in the story of the Electoral College.
Right.
One that's closer to our time, the
Yeah.
1960s.
The 1960s.
Yeah,
That's a time of, massive change, right?
it is.
The Civil Rights Movement.
Right.
The fight for voting rights.
Yeah.
What role did the Electoral College play in all that?
So imagine this.
Okay.
The Civil Rights Movement is gaining momentum.
Right.
Voting rights are expanding.
Yeah.
And then George Wallace,
Okay.
a segregationist candidate,
Right.
emerges,
Yeah.
and he threatens to use the Electoral College to his advantage.
Hold on. A segregationist candidate
Yeah.
trying to manipulate the Electoral College?
Uh-huh.
It sounds like history repeating itself?
You're right to see that connection. It shows how the legacy of slavery and discrimination
Right.
still had a hold on the Electoral College,
Yeah.
even a century after the Civil War.
Wow.
Thankfully, Nixon won that election,
Okay.
and that prevented a major crisis.
Right.
But it was really close.
Mhm.
And that close call made Congress seriously consider getting rid of the Electoral College.
It sounds like the perfect time for change.
You had bipartisan support, unions, even the Chamber of Commerce was on board.
So what happened?
Well, Southern senators,
Right.
they were afraid of losing power
Yeah.
if the Electoral College went away. So they used a very powerful political tool, the filibuster.
Oh, seriously.
They talked that amendment to death.
It's like a political horror movie
Yeah.
where the monster just keeps coming back.
It just wouldn't die. And it reminds us
Yeah.
that even when lots of people want change,
Yeah.
those who benefit from how things are
Right.
will fight hard to keep their power.
This has been a fascinating journey so far.
It has.
We've gone from powdered wigs
right.
and compromises in the Constitution
Yeah.
to filibusters
Yeah.
and the battle for voting rights.
It's quite a story.
And it seems like the Electoral College is right at the center of it all.
It's a system
Yeah.
that reflects both the brilliance
Okay.
and the flaws
Right.
of American democracy.
Yeah.
And as we move into the present day,
Right.
that debate about its relevance, about its fairness,
Yeah.
it's still going strong.
It is.
But before we get into those modern day arguments for and against the Electoral College,
Okay.
let's take a quick break.
Okay, so we've learned that the Electoral College has, a pretty long and complicated history,
It does.
shaped by, some pretty uncomfortable things to think about.
Right.
But why does any of this still matter today?
Right.
We're not living in the 1800s anymore.
Yeah.
Hasn't the world moved on?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that still divides Americans. There are still strong arguments for keeping the Electoral College.
Okay.
Some people argue that it gives smaller states a voice
Right.
in the presidential elections,
Okay.
and then it keeps them from being overshadowed by the bigger states.
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
But honestly, it always seems like,
Mm.
people are clinging to tradition
Yeah.
just for the sake of tradition.
Yeah, right.
We've always done it this way, so why change?
Yeah.
Is that really a good enough reason?
Well, that's where the critics come in.
Okay.
They say that this system undermines the idea of one person, one vote.
Right.
Their point is your vote doesn't really have the same weight
Yeah.
depending on where you live.
It doesn't seem very democratic.
Right.
I mean, isn't the whole point of a democracy
Yeah.
that every citizen's vote counts equally?
That's the heart of the debate, and
Yeah.
it's not just a theoretical concern either. We've seen recently how the Electoral College can lead to a candidate winning,
Yeah.
even if they don't win the popular vote.
Right, right.
And that raises some serious questions
Yeah.
about fairness and representation.
It really does make you wonder if this is the best system
Yeah.
for choosing our leaders. you know,
It's a really valid question.
especially in the 21st century.
Yeah. And to answer that fully,
Right.
we need to think about the historical context, sure,
Okay.
but also what might happen
Yeah.
if we keep the Electoral College
Right.
or if we get rid of it.
It's complicated.
It really is. There are no easy answers here.
So, can we break it down a little?
Yeah, let's do that.
Like, what are the main arguments for and against it today?
Okay, so let's start with the arguments for keeping it.
Okay.
Besides giving smaller states a voice for
Right.
people who support the Electoral College,
Yeah.
they also say it prevents chaos.
Okay.
If the election is super close and we need a recount,
Okay. Yep.
they say it's easier to recount votes in a few states
Right.
than the whole country.
I guess that's a practical point.
Yeah.
But, with all the technology we have now,
Yeah.
aren't nationwide recounts more doable?
That's a great point. And that's what critics of the Electoral College often say.
Right.
They argue that with modern voting systems and all the data we have, a national recount isn't as hard as it used to be.
Right.
And they also point out that the Electoral College can actually cause more problems,
Okay.
more uncertainty, more controversy, like
Wow.
we've seen in recent elections where the popular vote winner didn't become president.
Exactly. And those situations have really made people question
Yes.
if the Electoral College is really representing
Right.
what the people want.
Absolutely. Critics say it distorts the democratic process by giving too much power to a few swing states
Right.
and basically ignoring the votes of people in other states.
So it's like tradition and stability on one side versus fairness and representation on the other.
Exactly.
And whether the Electoral College even works in a modern democracy,
Right.
it's a tough call.
It is. And ultimately, there's no right or wrong answer here.
Okay.
It comes down to values,
Mhm.
to what we think is important.
Right.
What matters most when we choose our leaders?
Mm.
Do we stick with tradition, with stability?
Right.
Or do we make sure every vote counts equally
Right.
and that the majority wins?
That's a big question.
It is. Those are the fundamental questions at the heart of all of this.
And as we've seen, these questions aren't new.
No, they're not.
They've been around since the beginning of our country,
Like, right?
and they're still challenging us today.
They are.
But it's important to remember,
Yeah.
this system we have,
Yes.
it's not set in stone.
It's not.
It was made by people with choices and compromises.
Absolutely.
And just like they made those choices back then,
Yeah.
we can make different choices today.
We absolutely can. And
Yeah.
that's the power of understanding all of this.
Right.
It's not about telling you what to think. It's about giving you the context and the different perspectives so you can make up your own mind.
Because ultimately,
Yeah.
the future of our democracy depends on,
Mm-hmm.
on people being engaged, being informed,
Yeah.
and being willing to, question their leaders
Absolutely.
and hold them accountable.
Very well said.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up,
Okay.
there's one more point I want to make.
Okay.
We've talked about the history of the Electoral College.
Yeah.
But we also need to think about
Okay.
what the current system means for future elections.
That's a good point. It's not just about the past.
Right.
It's about how the Electoral College will shape our politics
Yeah,
in the years to come.
exactly.
What should we be thinking about as we look ahead?
Well, one thing that worries people is,
Yeah.
how divided American politics is becoming.
Right.
And the Electoral College, with its focus on winning just a few states,
Yeah.
might actually be making that worse because it encourages candidates to focus on very specific groups of voters
Right.
instead of trying to appeal to the whole country.
I see. So if winning means just getting those few key states,
Yes,
then candidates might not care about issues that matter to people
exactly.
in other parts of the country.
That's right.
That makes sense.
And this can create a situation
Yeah.
where the president is elected by like a small percentage
Right.
of the total population, and that could divide the country even more.
So the Electoral College could actually be contributing to the problem,
Yes.
to the divisions that are hurting our democracy.
It's a real concern.
Yeah.
And it's something that,
Right.
both citizens and policymakers need to think about carefully
Yeah.
when we consider the future of how we vote.
Right.
Do we want a system where candidates have to build broad coalitions?
Right.
and appeal to lots of different voters.
Yeah.
Or one where they just focus on narrow interests and swing state strategies.
That's a big question.
It is.
It really shows how important this whole debate is.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about some abstract political mechanism.
Right.
We're talking about, like, the very core of our democracy.
You're absolutely right. The Electoral College isn't just a procedure.
Yeah.
It's a system that really affects who we are as a nation
Right.
and how we choose to govern ourselves.
I think it's safe to say
Yeah.
that this deep dive has really opened my eyes.
Good.
And I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, right?
We've uncovered this whole intricate history,
Yeah.
weighed the arguments,
Right.
and seen just how, like, embedded the system is in American politics.
It really is.
What's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is just, like, awareness.
Yeah.
The Electoral College isn't some,
Thing of the past?
Right.
It's actively shaping what's happening now and what's
Yeah.
going to happen in the future.
Right.
Understanding how it works, the good, the bad, the weird,
Yeah.
that's the first step to making informed choices.
I think it's easy to just tune out during elections
Oh, yeah.
when you feel like your vote doesn't really matter.
Right.
But knowing how the system works,
Yeah,
it can actually make us, like, more engaged, right?
absolutely. And as we've seen,
Yeah.
it's not like this untouchable force.
Yeah.
It's the result of human decisions
Right.
made in specific times and places.
Yeah.
And if we decide it's not working anymore,
Right.
we can change it.
That's a powerful thought.
It is.
But practically speaking,
Yeah.
what can our listeners actually do with this information?
Several things, actually.
so good.
First, just being informed is huge.
Yeah.
Talk about this with people.
Okay.
Friends, family, colleagues.
You'd be surprised how many haven't really thought about the Electoral College.
It's true.
Yeah.
We tend to just accept it as, like, part of politics.
Yeah.
But making people aware of it,
Yes.
that's so important for starting a conversation
Absolutely.
about, how to maybe change it.
Exactly. And beyond just talking,
Yeah.
there are things you can actually do.
Okay.
Support groups working for electoral reform. Contact your elected officials. Tell them what you think.
Right.
Stay engaged with the issue.
So it's about taking what we've learned
Yeah.
and turning it into action.
Exactly.
But I think for some of our listeners,
Yeah.
this might have raised more questions than answers.
Sure.
Where can they go to learn more?
Well, that's the great thing.
Yeah.
There's always more to discover.
Right.
The Throughline episode we talked about.
Yeah.
That's a great place to start.
Okay.
There are tons of books, articles, websites
Huh.
that go deeper into all the details.
The whole world to explore.
It is.
And remember, think critically.
Yes, very important.
Don't just believe everything you read or hear.
Right.
Look at the evidence. Consider different views.
Yeah.
And come to your own conclusions.
That's what we hope this deep dive has inspired you to do. To go beyond the surface.
Yeah.
To really dig into this complex system and how it affects American democracy.
So, to wrap things up,
Okay.
what's the final, a thought-provoking question
Good question.
we can leave our listeners with today?
How about this? Does the Electoral College,
Okay.
with its crazy history
Right.
and its potential to, mess with the idea of one person, one vote,
Yeah.
does it really reflect the kind of democracy we want to be? Or does it need to change?
Yeah.
Just like our country has changed
Right.
to better fit the needs and ideals
Okay.
of America in the 21st century.
That's a really good question,
It is.
and one that each of us needs to think about. Thanks for joining us in this deep dive into the Electoral College.
Thanks for having me.
We hope it's made you curious
Yeah.
and inspired you to keep exploring
Right.
this fascinating and super important part of our democracy.
Couldn't have said it better myself.